Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Catherine Clinton, and she is a licensed naturopathic physician and has spent over 17 years helping people overcome their health issues. She completed her Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine from the National University of Natural Medicine and diagnosed with two autoimmune conditions and Lyme disease while in medical school. She actually began a long and difficult journey of healing. Dr. Catherine has multiple articles that have been published in peer-reviewed research journals. She maintains a small practice in Eugene, Oregon, and Dr. Catherine teaches doctors, healthcare practitioners, and health enthusiasts from around the world how to apply the principles of quantum biology for their health, and is a sought-after speaker and with speaking engagements across the globe. Her mission is to empower as many people as she can with the knowledge of quantum biology for health and to help them explore a new perspective in healing, which is exactly aligns with our mission. So that is why we are so excited to have her today. And Dr. Catherine, I have heard you speak about water, about coherence, fascia, sound. Today we're focused on immunity, but I just want to invite, if we end up touching on any of those things, you feel free to, share about those things. And I know you call this the biofield medicine. So I guess from there, you can share a little bit about your story and then we will go down the quantum rabbit hole from there.
Well, thank you guys for having me on today. This is going to be fun. And yeah, we can talk about all of it because it's all interconnected, right? And I think I got my start. I'm a licensed naturopathic physician. So when I was in my second year of naturopathic medical school, I got really sick. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis, ulcerative colitis. These are autoimmune conditions. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. I was in a spot and I was actually in a great spot to kind of put some of the physical pieces back together and become productive again and see patients and do clinical rotations. But I didn't get that last layer of health, right? That vitality. There was no supplement, there was no protocol that was really bringing that back to me. And that's when I started entering into the world of quantum biology. And it was a physician that I was doing clinical rotations with who was pushing me to look at psychoneuroimmunology. And that's just a big word for how our thoughts and emotions impact our biology. And at the same time, I was researching mitochondrial research because this was 20 years ago. It was like all the rage. Mitochondria, what are those? And I found a research article from Martin Picard about how our thoughts and emotions impact our mitochondria. And at the same time, I was looking at research out of UC Berkeley and looking at how photons and photosynthetic bacteria travel through that bacterium. And it was this incredible confluence of all of those things that brought me to understand that there's this language of frequency in the body. And our chemical mechanical model that we have been trained in, it's still being taught in medical schools across the globe, only speaks to a part of what biology does. And this understanding of quantum phenomenon and this language of frequency in the body is such an important perspective to expand our understanding of how life works, of how health and disease work.
That's
So
amazing.
thankful that you that doctor gave you sent you down one rabbit hole and then you found your others. I'm not happy that you got so sick, but it sounds like have you healed all those now? Are they all in control?
Yeah, I'm symptom free, but I also say like those are in my deck of cards, right? So I can bring them back if I want to, if I want to lead a really unhealthy lifestyle. Actually, the only time I've had symptoms is due to stress. So it's just that clear reminder of how our own internal frequency and thoughts and emotions can impact our health. But no, I'm symptom free and excited about that.
Wow.
That's
Well,
amazing.
we've got you even more on a pedestal now for for getting the, putting that deck of cards aside, in the drawer, and being able to control that's really something. It's a real inspiration, because just to have one of those, like Hashimoto's or Lyme or colitis, usually takes people down, and can take some people down for a lifetime. So really a testament to your own knowledge and application of everything you've learned. Wow. Well, this is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today. We could have gone sound, we could have gone water, but we chose immunity because it's the time of year. It's November when we're recording this, and it's usually the time when people do get taken down with, colds and whatever versions of things that are out there, viruses. And so, yeah, I've had a little insight from you. You've done some training. I've been on some training with you in the past, and you really opened my eyes to another view of how to approach immunity and the immune system, and what to do and about it. And knock on wood, I can say I haven't been sick since, so you may have had quite an impact on me. But let's just talk about for a little while. Now, I don't want to spend the whole time today, but I think we need to paint the picture of what the traditional immune system looks like from a, you are a doctor, like from your perspective. Just, yeah, if you can go down just to paint that picture of the innate and the adaptive immune system, and give us a few new terms that people may not be familiar with, but also kind of the warring the warring metaphor that comes up with the traditional immune system, if you could.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We'll just keep it simple and brief because, like you said, we could
I
get really complex with this. But we come into this world with an innate immune system, and that is skin, our mucosa, our tears, all of these things that allow us to navigate the world. And then we have an adaptive immune system. And this is sort of that interaction that comes from living in the world, and that interaction with our terrain, and how that influences our body and shapes our immune system. And when we're talking about our immune system, we're talking about cells in our body, right? So we have red blood cells that bring oxygen throughout the body. We know that when we get a scratch or a cut, blood comes out red, those red blood cells. But our immune system is made up of white blood cells, and they are really communicating to each other in this cytokine pattern, these chemical messengers. And they're also communicating in other ways we can talk about from a quantum biological perspective. But when we're looking at these white blood cells, and there's some specific sex in there that we probably don't need to touch on today, but there's three main sections of the immune system when we're simplifying it. We have Th1, and these are T helper cells. These are white blood cells that deal with infections, they deal with inflammation. We have T helper cells, Th2 cells, and these cells deal with parasites, they deal with allergies, seasonal allergies, right? When we're sneezing from the grass or the tree pollen, that's a Th2 response, versus when we're sick with a cold, that's a Th1 response. And they have an inverse relationship. So when we have a high Th1 response, and a lot of those cells in our system, they depress a Th2 response, and vice versa, right? When we have a lot of those allergic responses in the body, it's depressing a infectious Th1 response. And then we have different sectors like Th17, which deals with a lot of autoimmunity. But the other section we should really talk about is the T regulatory cells, the Th3, the Treg cells. And these T regulatory cells are going around and they're putting out inflammatory fires in the body, right? So you have an infection, your immune system is talking, conversing, sending all these messages, and those Treg cells say, okay, thanks, your job is done. We're going to quiet this reaction, clear this from the slate so we can have more conversations. And I term them conversations because the dominant paradigm in medicine is really that our immune system is a defensive system to defend against microbial invaders, right? This military way of viewing the immune system. And I don't think that's accurate. I think a more apt analogy is that there's a conversation happening. And that goes back to that adaptive immune system, that there's a learning that our body and our immune system goes through as it encounters different things in our environment, different terrains. And it's more of a conversation. So when my kids have something like a cold or a flu, we talk about the conversation, and we talk about how we want the immune system to complete that conversation
I
and
love
have
it.
and have everything said. Let's not left anything unsaid. Let's complete that conversation and do it completely and quickly. So there's
I
no,
have to interject because
yeah,
when you spoke, you actually had a cold. This was 2, 3 years ago, and you the whole time you had this warm cup of tea, and that'll actually be maybe a question later why you picked tea, but it's almost like I'm now picturing, you telling your kids, okay, kids, here's your tea. We have to have a warm conversation with tea to get over this cold.
yeah, they're used to their mom being so strange. I
I
think
think they're lucky.
they're starting, my 14, almost 15-year-old is starting to really understand it. And he's like, "You're such a strange lady, but I love you, mom." Starting to get it. And I home so they're able, in the month of October, I was at all these speaking events and they traveled with me, and he really started to understand, oh, you aren't just making these weird things up. There's a community out there that thinks this is really cool. And so that's been fun. But yeah, we talk about conversations. And I think it's important, especially as somebody who's been diagnosed with two autoimmune conditions. If we Googled what is an autoimmune condition, it would say the definition of an autoimmune condition is your body attacking itself. And that right there in that definition is a complete disempowerment of our relationship with our body, with the world around us. And if we looked at it from a different perspective, which I think we should, an autoimmune reaction is your body responding to the continued danger signals that it's being sent. It's an appropriate response, and it's a response to these danger signals that we see in the world around us. And danger signals can be toxins in our food, our air, our water. They can be a misaligned circadian rhythm, right? Up late at night, not getting morning sun, not getting natural light throughout the day. It can be incoherent immune or emotional dialogue or narrative that we have in our body that's constantly running and suppressing that conversation, increasing that danger signal. And so I talk a lot about increasing those signals of safety to downregulate those danger signals because we need that cellular safety to heal. And so I think of the immune system as a conversation, and I think that that's a much better analogy than this military and the body attacking itself and this whole fear and disempowerment that is currently being talked about in the mainstream narrative.
Wow. You answered about three of my main questions all in one answer. But we're going to go there. We'll still go a little deeper. This idea of the quantum immune system, that's what blew my mind when you taught me a few years ago. And you kind of mentioned it as a dance, but this is interesting. I like, and you even talked about the other system with the T1, TH2, and the T-reg being a dance as well. But yeah, I do like this conversation. Very interesting. So there's so many things to come up with that. One of the keys that you talked about was this entrainment of the morning sun. Can you tell us why the morning sun? Why isn't the entrainment of the sunset or noonday sun? Why would you pick the morning sun for the immune system specifically?
Well, I think that it's both the morning sun and the darkness. When we're looking at the function of a robust immune system that has all of those different cells functioning the way they should, it means that we're getting out in that morning sun and cueing those circadian rhythms that are aligned with that big biological. I mean, there's thousands of biological cues that are matched with that morning sun. And so that's powerful to set up that immune system. But what's interesting to note is those signals can't be completed. That immune system cascade, that cellular cascade, can't happen if we haven't had darkness the night before. So it's really this. I'll go back to that analogy of a dance, right? We really need that pairing. We really need the two of those things in tandem to have a functioning immune system.
With we'll go back to the morning. Both are so well, morning or night. Our listeners have heard about the SCN. It's probably worth just repeating it, what SCN stands for. But could you tell us a little bit about that cueing and how that might cue the immune system through the SCN?
Definitely. So we have a specialized layer of cells at the back of our eye called the retina. And within the retina, we have these specialized proteins called melanopsins, and they're sensors for blue and ultraviolet light. And when light in the morning enters our eye, we have this spectrum of light as the sun takes its course throughout the sky. When it first comes onto the horizon, it's rich in red and infrared light. And that sends this signal of safety to our nervous system. And as the sun climbs about 10 degrees over the horizon, 15 degrees, it depends on where you are, where your location is. But we start to see a rise in blue light, a rise in ultraviolet A light. And as that light enters the eye and hits the retina and those specialized melanoma, that information is taken, that light is turned into an electrical signal. And it goes through our track into the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that is a part that of our brain and the hypothalamus in the center of our brain, that's really our master circadian clock. And what's interesting is this is kind of a new and emerging field, although if you look back at ancient indigenous cultures, each one of them had a reverence and a ritual for greeting that morning sun, right? But we're now starting to understand with the help of this field called chronobiology. There were three researchers who were awarded the Nobel Prize for their work on chronobiology, how light affects our biology. And it's profound. Almost every single cell in our body has a circadian gene or a circadian clock. And those cells are peripheral clocks, right? They're not that master SCN, which is our master circadian clock. And as that information enters the SCN, again, it's transferred into an electrical current, electrical information that's transferred to all of those peripheral cells throughout the body to let them know what time it is. And we have a circadian biology that is timed with the rhythm of the sun. And that morning sun is particularly aligned with a lot of our immune functions. And if we've gotten a good sleep the night before, if we've been in darkness and we've allowed that melatonin to be released from the pineal gland so that we have a deep restorative sleep, so we have that anti-inflammatory, antioxidant effect of melatonin, then we're able to start those immune cells. Our macrophages are on alert to have these conversations with anything that we find in our terrain, and we see that guided by that morning light.
And
So
I want you to that those people that won the Nobel Prize, just to so everyone knows, that was only in 2017. That wasn't that long ago. Before we leave the topic of sun, I want to ask a question about a couple people in my life have autoimmune, and I'm curious. So they're told by their doctors to actually not go in the sun. And I would love for you to shed some light, if you will, on why that person would be different than any other person. And it could be that maybe the medications they're taking make them sun sensitive. That could definitely play into it, but maybe just also like sharing how someone could get the signaling without maybe being like in the direct sun, just so people have context of how important it still is to get these signals.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're talking about might very well be those medications or a hypersensitivity to the sun.
Mhm,
And there's so many benefits of the sun, but there's no denying that there can be damage from the sun as well. And we don't
mhm,
want that, right? And we could spend a whole hour talking about how to build up that tolerance and how to be in the sun safely and da 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 da. But specifically to the question that you asked, we're talking about two different things. The sun hitting our skin also acts as a circadian regulator. It also has this benefit of melanin and this reservoir of renewable energy that's happening from the light in our environment, the melanin in our skin, the water that lines it. But what I was just talking about is all through the eyes. And I see patients sometimes that are really debilitated and in a really bad spot. And they're not someone that I say, okay, go out barefoot and see the morning light and ground. And if it's cold, get cold exposure. I mean, they're really sick. We start with open a door, open a window, and let that light in our environment. I think we're often like fish in a sea, not realizing that this light isn't exclusive to where it's shining on, right? Like having a torch or a flashlight. And we assume that the light is only hitting what's in that part that's illuminated, right? That little
mhm,
circle that a flashlight is
mhm,
pointing at the ground and illuminating. But we have to understand that those photons of light are bouncing and ricocheting all around our environment. If I am in a standardly lit modern room, the intensity of the light, the lumens, the lux, would be from about 200 to 500, 500 on the really bright end of it, right? If I opened a window, if I let natural light come in unimpeded by glass or any other filters, then we could see that light, that lux, and that intensity in that room go up thousands
mhm,
of lux or intensity, right? So if I go outside on a really cloudy day where it's not that sunny out at all and the sun is obscured, like you and I in the Pacific Northwest that we see often, we're still getting tens of thousands of lux and intensity in that daytime light. And if we can open a door, open a window, and get that light in our environment in our eyes, that's a beautiful way to entrain the bodies in the shade. We are still getting that natural light in our eyes and not on our skin.
Thank you for saying that. That has been my recommendation actually. So thank you so much for that.
Catherine, with just before we leave kind of well, there's two things I want to ask you. I guess just on sunlight, you haven't mentioned vitamin D. Is that in the quantum immune system perspective? Are we worried about vitamin D getting enough or?
Well, I don't like to worry, but yeah, we we want to be mindful, sure. So we see this beautiful conversation happening seasonally. So we're talking about that circadian daily rhythm, that 24-hour, and everyone has a variance to that. Some people are a little over, it's quite individual, but it's around that 24 hours. There's a seasonal rhythm to our body, and there's a benefit for being aligned with the seasons as well. So if I'm building my tolerance to be out in the sun in the springtime. So, for example, I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, and we're not going to see a UV index of 2 or above until March, right? So, as soon as that happens, it's still chilly out, but you'll see me without clothes on. I mean, hopefully you won't, but I will be outside with very little clothes, getting that sun when the UV index is low so that I can build melanin slowly in anticipation of that intense summer sun, right? So I'm building that ability to be in the sun longer. But as you can see, I'm fair skinned, and I will often during the sun that summer day, I will be retreating to the shade. I will be under a sun hat because I don't want the damage. But I can build that relationship to be in the sun and get that vitamin D conversion because that's really important for our body. We know, I mean, hundreds of different biological functions. Vitamin D is part of that reaction, part of that cascade. It's anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant, it helps with mitochondrial regulation. There's so many things that vitamin D does. But if I'm getting that vitamin D in the summertime, it is fat soluble and it is meant to last throughout the winter. And as the days get shorter and the nights get longer, I transition from a being of sun, reaping the benefits of sun and vitamin D, and I transition into the seasonal being where these longer nights are meant to reap more melatonin. And we see a relationship there between melatonin and vitamin D. If I am high in vitamin D, it helps with my melatonin production, and vice versa. If I have that melatonin, if I am lowering the lights at night when the sun goes down in the fall and the winter in those longer nights, and really be mindful of my melatonin production, I am regulating that vitamin D release and I'm keeping my stores of vitamin D higher throughout the winter. So, yes, we want vitamin D, it's important, but we want to also kind of think of it in a bigger context that it's it's a seasonal rhythm and it's in flux and in relationship with the darkness of fall and winter as well.
Beautifully said. Thank you. So to finish the traditional, I want to say versus the quantum immune system, it's not a can you just confirm it's not a versus, it's they're working, it's all under, like the quantum is underlying the traditional, like all these chemicals with, little, what do you get, receptors on the cells, all of that is working when we look at the quantum immune system. And I do want to get into water. That's where we're going. Yeah, with the entrainment of all these clocks and the communication happening that way, am I correct in saying it's an underlying layer, or how would you term it?
Yeah, I think that's important to note because it's back to that we're so fond of that military black or white, right or wrong, right? They're fighting, it's this versus that. And no, we know that chemical mechanical model exists, absolutely. But we know it doesn't explain everything. And that's where quantum biology comes in. You know, if we think of the body as trillions of cells, which it is, and each one of those cells is performing hundreds and thousands of tasks, mathematically, that can't be explained with this chemical mechanical model. This idea of random collision, where you have a biological key bumping around in a cell until it finds its receptor, unlocking that receptor, and then biological action happening. We know that part is true. It does unlock that receptor. It does initiate action in the body. It's the randomness that we're calling into question. It's the randomness that is being replaced with this understanding of quantum biology and this idea of resonance and frequency in the body, and how, like two tuning forks, where you strike one, if the other one is tuned at that same note, it will also sing that same song. And it doesn't have to be a chemical, physical, mechanical interaction. It can be a language of frequency in the body. And that's what quantum biology talks about.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, let's go to water. We know you
Mhm.
are an expert on structured water, coherent domain, all these terms that we hear. But something you taught us, and I hope that this isn't far back in your memory and that you still know all these terms, but the terms that you taught us, it was something I had never heard of called EIW and then ECM, stiffness. So I guess could we go there? Could you explain what its exogenous interfacial water stress is and how that would affect the extracellular matrix stiffness and how that plays out in the immune system?
Yes. So
Okay.
those are the big fancy words, and
Words, yeah.
they're talking about this specialized water that forms on our water-loving surfaces. And what are those surfaces? Cell membranes inside of the cell, our fascia, our tissue, our organs, they are all hydrophilic, meaning they're water-loving. So water isn't repelled from the surface, it can come right up to the surface. And when it does, something incredible happens. That water changes structure and it becomes more viscous or gel-like. And Gerald Pollack and his team out of the University of Washington have done incredible research with this form of water. He's termed it easy water or exclusion zone water. And what they've found, and many others have replicated, is this water takes a negative charge. It takes on a negative charge. And as it builds, it creates this positively charged zone of water. And that separation of charge between the negatively charged cell-bound structured easy water and that positively charged water that forms right outside of it creates a separation of charge like a 9-volt battery. It holds potential energy. I refer to it as the water battery within us. And what we're talking about with EIS, these stressors that can decrease that water zone, they can make it less, right? They can decrease that zone. And that zone of easy cell-bound water is really associated with health. And there's a wonderful study out if anyone wants to Google that EIS and see how it impacts different cells. They looked at infection, they looked at breast cancer cells, and they made the association between a thick, robust layer of this special form of water, this plasma water, right? Because it does have that negative and positive right close to each other. This plasma water that is forming around the cell, immune cells as well. And if that cell's water, cell-bound water is decreased, that's associated with infections. And that's something that we want to be mindful of that really no one is talking about when it
Mhm.
comes to immune system health. And that's something that we should be thinking about. And I know you mentioned me talking while I had a cold and I had a cup of tea, of hot
Tea.
tea. I'm
Yeah,
just
why?
gonna yeah, because here where I am, as the sun leaves that ultraviolet B, so right now in November, we're getting 0 ultraviolet B, 0 spectrum of the ultraviolet range that allows me to convert into vitamin D. But also, we're getting less infrared heat from the sun. There's infrared energy and light anytime the sun is up. But the sun here is behind a veil of gray, right? So there is less heat in our environment. And what these researchers have found is that infrared energy builds that specialized water, that negatively charged water around a cell. And it's important to note that our cells run on a negative charge, right? And so drinking something like a warm tea or a warm beverage or stew or putting a blanket over us at night or being in front of a fire or a warm bath or if we have the luxury having a sauna, all of these things increase our infrared energy and help build that structured water within us. And so that's what I was doing. I was tending
That's right.
to that water battery within me because I had a conversation going on in my immune system. And I was trying to help that along by building that infrared energy in the body and thus building that water within us as well. And I think that the research is pretty clear. It's emerging and it's in its infancy, but it does clearly show this association between that specialized water, that plasma water, that easy water around a cell, associating it with health. And if you talked with Jerry, which I have many times about what this is, he actually has a new book coming out in the next few months called Charged. And it's all about charge in the world around us, negative charge in cells. But he would say that the negative charge is what's giving, that's what's really special about this form of water. And that's what's happening in the immune system. And I agree. I think that's part of it, but I think it's only part of it. And I think what's also happening there is that that specialized water is an antenna for frequency information in the body, whether we're talking about light, whether we're talking about electrical, magnetic, electromagnetic fields, whether we're talking about scalar fields. There's a wonderful study about scalar fields and immune system. Leukocytes, that's a different kind of immune cell in the body, and how those fields can be helpful in building that population of cells in the body. Even the quantum field and the 0 point field, which is not well understood, but we should still leave some room in our discussions for these things we don't fully understand, but we understand they have an impact. Biofield, subtle field, 0 point field, whatever we want to call it. I think that that water is an antenna for that information in our environment.
We're gonna take that and go to cancer if we could. I seem to be attracting more clients with cancer. I don't know if it's a reflection that there's more cancer going on right now, but there's a study that you talked about. I haven't read it, but it's by, it's gonna sound funny here, but Zhang, Zhang, and Wang, if you can believe it at all. You showed us on a slide. It was targeting extracellular matrix stiffness and mechanic transducers to improve cancer therapy. And my understanding from that was how the water and the fat, like ECM stiffness, are we talking fascia? Is that tissue that's getting stiff because it's not hydrated enough? And so if we don't have enough of this easy water or structured water, all the different names it has that Gerald Pollack has taught us about, is that key? Is that key that we need to keep things hydrated, and then that will help our immune system?
Yeah, that's what the research seems to be showing. Absolutely. There's other research out there showing that this negative charge really keeps the replication in check. When we look at cancer, we see this out of control cell replication, right? Where the cells are dividing and replicating at really fast rates that we don't see in other cell populations and healthy cell populations. And that has been correlated with a negative charge. And what has that negative charge? That easy water is definitely contributing to that cellular negative charge.
Wow. Do you have cancer clients in your practice? Are you working with that population? I know you, yeah, I guess I should ask, do you work with primarily autoimmune, or what kind of demographic?
Yeah, I see a lot of autoimmune and gastrointestinal demographic. I have seen cancer patients. I don't actually take new patients at the moment, but that doesn't mean I don't see new patients, because my current patients are always saying, "Look, my mom or my sister or my bestest friend." So I always make allowances for that. But But cancer isn't like my specialty or something that I see only, right? Have started my practice 17 years ago, mainly in gastrointestinal and autoimmune, but definitely I've seen a lot of cancer patients. When I was in school, I did many rotations in cancer wards because that was, or the cancer shifts at our clinics, because that's what I thought I wanted to specialize in until I got sick. And then when I got sick, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a no-brainer. I know I'm gonna specialize in autoimmune and
Yeah,
GI issues.
that was the
But
universe talking.
yeah, it's like, oops,
Guidance
redirect
counselor.
here. But I agree with you. The population that we used to see, the demographics are changing. We're seeing a lot more cancer these days.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, there was a couple messages from when you worked with us way back when that I wanted to get out. Something going back to the morning light was that you brought out the fact that it's almost like a different chain, it's a way of thinking that if we actually need an ability to induce inflammation in the morning. Do you remember teaching us that? And this idea that with so we get sunshine, mitochondria need to be able to produce reactive oxygen species. I know we didn't go here, but this is really the conversation that's happening, I think, around the body. And I just wanted to, could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of what the conversation really is for the immune system?
Yeah, absolutely. When we get that morning sun, we see that release of cortisol, and we should have, if we take a picture, and I often do this with patients, right? We can do that salivary 4-point test that shows us that diurnal rhythm of cortisol, or that daytime rhythm of cortisol. And you want this build in the morning to a peak, a burst of cortisol in the morning. And cortisol, so many functions in the body. And one of them is sort of inflammatory response that induces different things in our immune system. And just like reactive oxidative species, we want inflammation in the body. Inflammation is a natural, normal thing. Those reactive oxygen species are serving as signals in the body. And if we quench that communication doesn't happen, and that is not good. If we have too many reactive oxygen species in the body, then that can lead to rampant inflammation, that can lead to metabolic issues and obesity and cancer and all these things, right? It's this delicate dance that the body does. It's this Goldilocks zone that life exists at, that we really have to honor. It's not the black and whites, it's not the extremes, it's this intelligence too. And I really talk about this with deuterium too. Our body and nature has designed these incredible vessels that we live in. And the things that we see naturally in the body, like reactive oxygen species, like deuterium, like inflammatory cascades, they have purposes. They are important. Now, our modern lives have really skewed that. So, a lot of us are living with rampant reactive oxygen species, inflammation, deuterium, and that's not good, right? But it's not that those things are bad, it's that we have put inputs that our body sees as danger signals, and that skews the balance, right? It's such an intelligent design. It's such an incredibly beautiful and sophisticated body that we have, the wisdom in the body. And I caution people when they start to get really black and white, and that's bad, and this is good. And it's like, no, it's a balance. It's a balance that life exists at. And if we can be more nuanced in so many things, in our discussions about health and in all of our discussions, if we can get more nuanced, then we really allow that balance to come out in so many different ways, both biologically and emotionally, in our relationships, so many different ways when we're talking about coherence and that frequency of coherence in the body. It's two or more things working as one. It's two people dancing the tango. And that's what we need in health. We see the problems happening when the music gets so loud and chaotic that one person's stepping on the other person's toe and they become like incoherent, right? They're not dancing at the same rhythm. I would say the same thing about our immune system, about our inflammatory state. It's this beautiful flux and flow. And I think I went really extended that answer when it
But
was about morning sun.
yeah, but I guess that the mitochondria, that whole electron chain, getting that sun produces the right amount of reactive oxygen species that we need, or maybe that our body needs at that time for our immune system to prevent the illness, or I don't want to say combat the illness, converse about the illness. Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
do you have any case studies for us? Any kind of a client that you had that you could think of where they maybe had some kind of an immune issue, maybe autoimmune, where you could go there, a colitis or or immune type issue, skin issue, whatever, something like that, that you use these quantum health strategies that may have helped their immunity or helped their condition?
Yeah. Definitely. We talked about one before we hit record, and I
Mm.
remember him so distinctly, this teenager with psoriasis. And psoriasis is a skin condition, and it builds up these rough kind of plaques. And as a teenager, that's a problem because it's visible, right? And we're going through that stage of peer acceptance and all those different things. And this teenager came to me, and I didn't have a lot to work with as far as patient compliance
Mm.
because this young gentleman was not compliant. And
Mhm.
so what I was a diet, I mean, that was just out the window. So many different things that I had suggested is like, no. And very clearly, like, I don't think that'll work. And polite, but there were only a few avenues that I could really get in and make some headway with. And they were grounding and natural light, getting out in the morning light, getting out in the afternoon light. We made a deal of doing screens, his handheld screens, just do them outside. Go sit down on the grass and do your screens outside. So you are at least getting that natural light in your eyes and on your skin. And that was enough to reverse this psoriasis. And it was unsightly because it also becomes itchy. So you've got these thick flaky white patches that are itchy, and you itch them and they bleed. I mean, it was not something it was not a comfortable thing for a teenager going through high school to have socially, right? Let alone the actual physical aspect of it. And so it was this incredible testimony to the power of natural light and grounding to help regulate the nervous system. And he was also pretty compliant with blue light at night and blocking that blue light through glasses and screen filters and such. I think mostly because of the inroads that we made with the natural light and the grounding to begin with. He saw the plaques decrease and the inflammation decrease. And so that was a wonderful example and just such a wonderful thing to see with someone so young to really get that handle on understanding how a human body works in this world and how to regulate that inflammation. And m- more recently, that was several years ago, more recently, in the last month, I had a woman with rheumatoid arthritis, and she had done amazing work with her circadian rhythm, grounding, She saw her inflammatory markers and her symptoms come down. Rheumatoid arthritis is a condition of extreme inflammation in the joints. And this woman, when she came to see me, was using a wheelchair at times, a walker definitely. And she was able to get out of those things. But I think honestly, this is a plug for a different intervention in the quantum perspective. She really incorporated a lot of coherence techniques internally for her own internal dialogue, her own frequency. And she saw a lot of emotional release, trauma acceptance that also was dramatically impacting her inflammatory response and her rheumatoid arthritis, her autoimmune condition. And so for me, that was a wonderful thing and a validation that sunlight is powerful, absolutely. Grounding is powerful, absolutely. So is the frequency of our thoughts and emotions. And that was a powerful reminder. And I think that was really my start, my gateway into this world of quantum biology. And it was just a reminder of how powerful that state of internal dialogue is, that state of coherence is for regulating and guiding and informing our immune system.
Oh, I'm glad you added that other case study. And
Yeah.
something I had written down from the psoriasis case kind of speaks to both of these, but because in psoriasis, typically, it would be steroids, right? To help. It can be. And then, rheumatoid arthritis, I know they're using these very expensive biologics. They can be like $10,000. And something that you had said, I'll quote you, was modern medicine can, sometimes, can hits with immune modulators like a hammer, like with steroids and these biologics. When we walked away from the natural immune modulators like grounding and sunlight, and I'll add like blocking blue light or yeah, choosing to find out how to get coherence with your emotions. So that was a question we had that I completely missed, was to ask you about how important the you know emotions are with the immune system, but you answered it beautifully with that example.
Can I ask what modality did you use? Did you help her and guide her with that? Or did she kind of go off on her own, like you had kind of planted the seed and then she kind of took what she wanted and left the rest, if you will?
Yeah, well, I think when we see our patients or see our clients in front of us, if we can actively listen, we kind of get a sense of when we're hearing their story. Not only are we being a safe harbor for their story, we're also getting clues and understanding their emotional reactions, right? Their
Mhm.
patterns, their emotional patterns, maybe even some of that internal dialogue that they might not even be cognizant about. So,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So with her, I could see that pattern of I'm not worthy
Okay.
showing up. And rather than saying, I hear that you're saying you're not worthy, I should, because that's not as productive as me sharing my experience and saying, here, I got this far until the doctor that I was shadowing on clinical rotations and who was my doctor told me to look at psychoneuroimmunology, right? That big word for how our thoughts and emotions impact our biology. And my reaction was, yeah, let's look at all these patients. Let's talk about their psychoimmune state, right? Let's not look at mine. But by talking with her about my experience and talking with her about how I was really hesitant to do it because I just didn't want to, like, I was already sick. I was in trauma, like grad school, that is just, I don't know if I can do that. That sounds like a lot. And that is the most common reaction I get from patients, like, oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I think by telling her my reaction to that and telling her it actually wasn't. It wasn't this opening the box and pulling everything out and reliving and doing this whole
Yeah.
thing. It was dipping a toe into it, and it's almost like our trauma or our internal dialogues that are handed down at a young age, or wherever we may have picked up those internal dialogues that aren't serving our immune system and our biology and our health. At the time, it's so overwhelming, we put them somewhere in the body, but they're still sort of tapping. They're still sort of asking to be seen. And I think with trauma work, there's this notion of like, okay, we got to unpack it. We got to relive it. We've got to do this exposure therapy where we're always talking about it. When really, I see in my patient population, if there's just a safe place to acknowledge it, then that trauma moves. We get movement there. We get ease. We get a sense of safety in a body that has been traumatized. And that right there is so healing. I was first a doctor, I was a little terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get this person to a therapist. And like, I'm not trained in this, because I was coming from this perspective of, I need to fix this. I'm the doctor and I'm going to fix this,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to pull you through this trauma and we're fixing it. Now I understand that I don't fix anything. I've got some knowledge, but I'm a safe human being for you to be with. And you can tell your story and you can talk about your traumas. And if it becomes overwhelming, I kind of take a step back and regulate my own system. And that's not that I'm retreating from you as a patient, I'm regulating my own energy. And that in turn regulates your energy so that you are able to tell that story and say, well, you didn't freak out at that. You are still safe and open and compassionate, and maybe that means that I can walk with this and I can integrate this, and it doesn't have to be as heavy as it's always been. And so I think that's what I did with her, is just explain how it was in my own healing. And that allowed her to dip into some of that. And I also mentioned my love of heart coherence exercises and practices. And yeah, she did the work. I was not pulling or pushing. I was just opening a window that maybe if you want to look out at this view, neat
Yeah.
things can happen. And she did. And I think that it was just as, or maybe more powerful than the circadian and the grounding, which I love, but our mind is powerful.
Well, even so, when people learn this stuff that, many people do, they go down the circadian path, right? But then having this to pair with it. But it sounds like you were doing like, the mirror neurons and how they work. So in the moment, you are modeling for her and just for her to be open to it. You are modeling that for her. That's really beautiful. Well, we are running to the time we need to part ways here. So I wanted to ask you our signature question, and that is, what does quantum healthy mean to you?
That's a great question. You told me to keep this in mind, and then it flew out of my mind. But I
It's
think
okay.
the first thing that comes to my mind is just acknowledging this language of frequency in the world around us, whether that be light or sound or electrical fields, EMF, or our own frequency of thoughts and emotions. I think quantum healthy doesn't negate that chemical mechanical model, but it asks us to look at this expanded version where this language of frequency is just as important as everything we've learned about in mainstream science and school.
Oh my God. Beautiful answer. Beautiful answer. Where can people find you? And you can share also anything that exciting you might have going on that you would want to.
Well, I didn't get creative. I'm just Dr. Catherine Clinton. That's my website. That's my YouTube, my Instagram, Facebook. I'm really excited about a research project that I'm doing with Dr. Hemal Patel out of the UC San Diego. He has a research laboratory down there, and Dr. Christine Schaffner. We're doing a research study on heart coherence and mitochondrial function. So we're going to start recruiting for that in February, and I'm really excited to kind of bridge those two worlds. Every time I talk about heart coherence, I get people being like, that's woo, that's placebo, blah, blah. And I'm really excited to show the effects on mitochondrial function. And Dr. Patel has an amazing research lab and has been doing amazing work. And it's just an honor to partner with him. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for heading that for us. My goodness. And those are
Thank
some big names, people, if you don't know who those people are. So I'll hand it over to you, Laura.
Okay. Dr. Catherine Clinton, thank you so much. First, I've got a few. First, for coming back again. We haven't even asked you yet, but to talk about heart coherence and possibly sound, because we'd love to talk about those two subjects with you. We were going to talk water, but I think we covered water today. So, and just thank you for your health journey that led you to exploring the confluence of psychoimmuno and quantum biology, because I believe that you're really a dot connector. We need more of those. And for finding this whole language of frequency, this invisible intelligence in the form of things that Andeea and I like to talk about, which is photons of light and electrons and protons and phonons from sound, all on the backdrop of water, which is serving to inform our biology and state of health. And I would be remiss if I didn't also thank you for your wonderful message, which is we can heal our terrain and we can heal the terrain of this planet. We need this right now. And for just being so wonderful on Instagram, all the videos that you put out. And we were talking about this before the interview. We think of you as the OG of the hashtag tend your terrain. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to part 2.
Super. We do too.
Awesome. Yes, we do too. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quantum Healthy Podcast. We hope you found some value in this information. And if you feel inspired, please share it and leave us a 5-star review. This will help us reach so many more people. If you want to connect with Laura, you can find her at laurakistmanwellness.com and Andeea at andeearay.com. Links are below in the show notes. Now, go find some sunlight and embrace your own quantum healthy.